Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. So in this video I'd like to talk about The Light Ages by Seb Falk. The title of the book is a play on words. So there's the common historical thought, especially among non-historians, that the medieval period was just this dark, dirty period waiting for rebirth at the Renaissance. And of course this was not true. Depending on where you lived, this was the high points of the Islamic caliphates, the golden age there. China was doing pretty good at this point. But Falk continues the argument to say, yes, but even in Europe, during what we call the Dark Ages and the medieval period, science was progressing. Technology and society was continuing. It didn't die off. This was not a death of culture waiting for a resurrection in the Renaissance. Instead, things were progressing. They were doing so maybe in a somewhat slower fashion or somewhat different fashion, but this was not the end of science for that time period. And this book is really a history of astronomy. I have a minor in astronomy. I don't have that much background, so I have a little bit, but not a lot. And so it's one of those is like, okay, I can appreciate some of this, but definitely if I knew more astronomy, I would definitely appreciate this book a bit more. Now, that is not saying that it is inaccessible. It is definitely accessible, and Falk does go out of his way to explain different concepts that for someone who would be an astronomer would know very well. For someone who took astronomy 20 years ago, kind of like, okay, I remember these terms, but barely. And explains it well enough that I'm quite certain that someone who had never encountered them would understand what's going on. So this is definitely an accessible book, but I do think that those who have a much deeper astronomy background than myself would really get more out of this text, because this is very much an astronomy text. Now, he does go into a few of the other disciplines, but not by much. Okay, so basically the argument is going through is that astronomy, or what would become astronomy, was of practical value during the Middle Ages and has always been for areas such as navigation as well as timekeeping. Keep in mind, this is when Europe didn't have particularly that many mechanical clocks. Even water-based clocks in China were relatively new at this point. So if you wanted to tell time during the day, you used a sundial, which is, you're looking at the location of a star, the sun. And you would want to keep track of, how that progressed over the seasons, etc. But at night, the sun's on the other side of the planet. You can't see it. And so the way you would typically tell time would be to look at the stars. And the analogy that Falk gives is effectively, okay, we need to get up at this time in the morning. So brother low-ranking guy that we kind of confort to do this in the monastery, keep an eye out, and when that star starts hitting the chapel roof through that window, then wake everybody up. We need to get ready to get the day going. And of course, from that, you then progress, and you're starting to like, okay, how can we universalize this? How can we make instruments to work with this better, to predict where the stars are going to be in the future, or based on our latitude, because what the stars look like in, say, Milan are not going to look the same way up in the Orkney Islands. So we want to be able to extrapolate what's going on and continue on from the work of the ancients. Ptolemy was still known at this time. It's not that all culture had died off. It had definitely decreased. It had taken a hit with the fall of Rome, but it wasn't gone. And also kind of the international nature of things. And he follows a few different scholars at that time, and talking about individuals who may have traveled and studied in Paris, traveled up to the Orkney Islands, in the far north of Scotland, who had been around and had shared in communities and the development of universities with the High Middle Ages. So it's an interesting read. It is definitely very much focused on astronomy. I think he makes a very legitimate argument that the needs of the time for things such as timekeeping, keeping track of seasons, which of course that's relatively useful for you if you need to know when to plant, etc., as well as navigational needs, led to astronomy being preserved and actually progressing meaningfully within the European sciences. and that our view of the Middle Ages just being, a pile of mud up until the Renaissance is not true. And Falk is not the only author making this statement, but from this point of view, from the history of astronomy, I think this is a very nicely done argument. And then looking at the development of instrumentation and the improving of precision and the fine craftsmanship that was required to make what today we would look at and think of almost as an analog computer to calculate the positions of stars, etc. So not what we normally think of the Middle Ages, far more than a pile of muck and mire. A sophisticated society with skilled craftsmen and those undertaking meaningful scholarly work with the resources they have at hand, which would, once again, better than we might give them credit for. So yeah, definitely a good read. I will say I was hoping for a little bit more in the chemistry, medicine kind of area. So yeah, it's a good book. Once again, very, very, very astronomy focused, which, to be honest, I haven't seen that many history of astronomy texts out there. So in that light, good for it. It's a nice read. I enjoyed it. It was relatively quick. And with that said, have a wonderful day. If you choose to read it, great. If not, I totally understand. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.